Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a place where time drifts at its own rhythm and where wonder is allowed to settle without hurry. Tonight, we are beginning a long drifting question, one that asks us to step gently into the slow imagination of Earth itself. What if, after all the wanderings of its surface, after millions upon millions of years of drifting apart, the continents were to fold back together again? What if the world drew its scattered pieces into one great shadow stretching across the globe? It sounds like a dream, too large to hold in our hands, yet the more we breathe into it, the more it feels like a question worth lingering on. Before we continue, I'd love to ask you, where are you listening from in this moment? Are you close to the sea, where salt lingers in the air as a faint memory on the skin? Or are you inland, where the ocean is more of a forgotten thought than a nearby companion? And when was the last time you stood near the edge of water, letting its presence remind you of worlds hidden beyond vision? We have all had that moment, gazing into deep water, or tracing the horizon where land meets waves, and wondering what else, what more, might be there. If you feel a sense of warmth and calm in this kind of slow unfolding, I'd be grateful if you left a like, subscribed, or shared this journey with someone who might also need a gentle place to rest. Nothing here will rush you. Nothing here will demand more than quiet listening. To imagine the continents joining again is to imagine a memory long asleep. Their separation was not sudden, but gradual. A slow breath drawn out across millions of years, a drifting of plates pulled by forces buried deep in the planet's mantle. And if breaking apart was possible, is not the reverse also inevitable? Could the Earth, in its patience, already be preparing to fold itself back toward unity, as though it were turning the pages of its own diary in reverse? In deep time, everything changes, erodes, drifts, reforms. Oceans open only to close. Mountains rise only to crumble. Forests bloom only to turn to coal. If that is true, then the edges of continents are not endings, but slowly moving pieces in a pattern too large for human eyes. The thought draws us backward toward Pangaea, toward Gondwana, toward supercontinents that lived and died before even the first birds filled the air. The geology written in cliffs and the isotopes traced in ancient rocks whisper not just of once-joined lands, but of cycles. Cycles where every parting carries the promise of reunion. Perhaps Earth has a kind of memory, not in words or images but in movement and pressure, in the steady shuffling of plates. The sea floor spreads, the ridges open like seams in a fabric, and slowly, continents travel as if pulled by a will deeper than our own. And if such a world were to return, what would it feel like to stand at its center? No coastlines within reach, no ocean winds to cool the air, only the silence of a desert as large as a modern sea. Or what would it mean to live at its shoreline, where the gathered weight of land and the shrinking ocean currents would twist the climate into new patterns entirely? We do not truly know, but the echoes of possibility press against the imagination. Fossils hint that in ages when continents joined, extinctions moved through the earth like a quiet shadow. Is it because ecosystems could not breathe when too many species crowded together? Or because the atmosphere itself shifted with the changed tides? Maybe it was both. Maybe something else entirely. The idea is haunting precisely because we do not have all the answers. We only have Earth's reminders, written in fractured stone and scattered memory. One continent, one world, rising again from the drift of many. It has happened before, it may happen again. And yet, if even our continents can reunite after such separation, what else might the planet be capable of remembering? And yet, if even our continents can remember one another and slowly drift toward reunion, what invisible music guides their return? The answer lies beneath us, far deeper than cities, deeper than bedrock, in the restless bones of the earth. The surface we stand upon may seem solid, unmoving, but it is nothing more than a fragile raft of rock, carried slowly on a sea of molten mantle. We live our lives in moments too brief to notice, but the planet dreams in epochs, and its dreams take the form of motion. Continents wander, not in haste, but in a deliberate, patient ballet. Centimeters a year, almost nothing to us. Yet when those movements are stretched across millions of years, Mountains are built, oceans are closed, and identities of entire worlds are rewritten. It is a choreography without audience, but not without pattern. Tectonic plates grind, collide, and part like dancers circling in the dark. Their collisions raise mountain ranges that scrape the atmosphere. Their parting creates new oceans. Their grinding triggers earthquakes that echo like brief reminders of the power below. And while we often feel that our world is stable, balanced, dependable, the truth is softer and stranger. The ground beneath our feet is as fluid, in its own time scale, as clouds drifting across a morning sky. Imagine standing on a shoreline, believing it is eternal, when in truth that very coastline is a passing arrangement, a temporary sketch made by plate and tide. Fossils of ancient seashells found high in the Himalayas, thousands of meters above the modern ocean, reveal the memory of this dance. Mountains whisper of oceans buried, and deserts hide beneath them the sediments of long-forgotten waves. Even the chemical fingerprints within stone, oxygen and carbon isotopes, carry within them the traces of vanished climates, lost forests, and shallow lagoons erased long before humans opened their eyes. The Earth has been writing this story for billions of years, and every grain, every vessel of rock, is a page in its diary. Could it be that this dance is not random at all, but part of a deeper rhythm, something like a heartbeat spread across eons? Maybe the Earth does not simply drift, but remembers. Perhaps the movement of plates is a kind of memory loop, a cycle where continents split only to circle back, driven by heat, by gravity, by inevitability. The boundaries we draw on our maps, Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, are only temporary words for temporary seas. In deep time, oceans are created not to last forever, but to vanish. And as they close, they leave behind trenches, volcanic arcs, folded mountain belts, scars and echoes of the rhythm that goes on beneath our noticing. We may think of entropy as decay, but here entropy is also creation. Mountains rising only to crumble into sediments that rivers will carry to a future shore. An ocean floor descending into the mantle melted away, becoming magma, re-emerging as new crust on distant ridges. Nothing is still, nothing is wasted. The world is recycling itself, endlessly forgetting and endlessly remembering in equal measure. And we, brief witnesses of this cycle, glimpse it only through fragments. A shiver of the ground during an earthquake, the ash of a faraway volcano, the shifting color of a coastline when viewed from space. The slowness of these movements is what makes them invisible to us, and yet it is their very slowness that allows them power enough to shape an entire planet. A world split becomes a world reunited. Lost seas return as stone. Memory and matter overlap until it is impossible to know whether the continents are drifting outward or inward, or both at the same time. And as we listen to this slow dance continuing, patient and restless beneath our feet, we may wonder, if the land itself is always drifting, colliding, erasing, and renewing, how much can we truly trust the surface on which we build our lives? And if the Earth can move with such inevitability, what else, hidden in its memory, is also waiting to move again? If the ground beneath us is always moving, pulled by forces too ancient to resist, then perhaps it is only natural to ask, has the Earth performed this slow reunion before? The answer is whispered quietly in stone, in fossils pressed into layers of mud that hardened into rock, in isotope trails that carry signals from long-vanished oceans. Long before our maps were inked, long before any eye looked upon a globe, the continents gathered once more, and their great union bore the name Gondwana. We might imagine it as a land so vast it redefined the rhythms of the world. Its interior stretched so far from the sea that deserts consumed its middle, sands shifting endlessly under silent skies. Along its coasts, lush forests tangled with ferns and roamed with creatures whose names have become little more than echoes. Giant amphibians, slow reptiles, insects with wings that shadowed the river valleys. Later, when the Earth's climate changed, when ice sheets crept and withdrew, Gondwana shifted again, never fixed, always alive. And yet, the idea of it survives not because we can see it, but because the Earth itself remembers. Mountains in South Africa connect to chains in South America. Fossils of the same plant, Glossopteris, rooted in India, Australia, and Antarctica, form a map more truthful than any drawn in ink. When geologists first held these clues, they must have wondered, could the continents once have fit together like scattered puzzle pieces, edges still carrying the memory of a shared home? And if they did once, must they not also do so again? Maybe not tomorrow, nor even a million years from now, but eventually, inevitably, when the plates are ready to close their circles. Is it possible that the Earth itself carries this as memory, not conscious in the way we remember, but as something encoded in heat and pressure, in the drifting flow of its mantle, in the rise and fall of ocean ridges? Like forgotten thoughts that surface in a dream, Gondwana returns in fragments. A fossil here, a mountain seam there, an ancient mineral remembering the chemistry of an ocean long gone. Science lets us reconstruct the lost map, but wonder lets us ask, is this repetition a cycle without end? Or is it a kind of story the Earth has been trying to tell us? Entropy and time move in all directions. A supercontinent is both creation and decay. It brings abundance but also silence. Forests that stretch unbroken, but deserts that swallow life at the center. And in the very act of union, it already contains the seeds of separation. Cracks deepen, rifts form, and once again the one will become many. The Earth remembers Gondwana not only for its unity but for its impermanence. The fact that even a land so mighty was nothing more than a passing arrangement in a drama far larger than itself. And if Gondwana could vanish into fragments, what, then, of us? What will be left of our memory tens of millions of years from now when coastlines have shifted beyond recognition, when our mountains have eroded to dust, when our cities lie buried, compressed into stone? Will traces of us, like those of Gondwana, remain coded in geology, revealed only to distant minds that piece together our story from what endures? Maybe, maybe not. But the thought itself lingers like a faint breath across time. Earth does not forget. It simply stores its memories in ways we struggle to read. And if memory is hidden in stone, in fossils, in quiet isotope signatures, then perhaps the real question is not whether Earth remembers Gondwana, but what else it remembers, what other gatherings, what other vanishings, what other ages lie waiting unrevealed beneath our wandering feet. If the memory of Gondwana lingers in stone, then oceans, too, must carry their own forgotten stories. And yet, oceans are not eternal. They open wide with the spreading of ridges, and they vanish just as slowly, swallowed by the closing of trenches. When continents turn inward and draw together, the seas that have stretched between them are erased, dragged beneath the crust, folded into silence. We may think of oceans as endless, unchanging blue, but in deep time they are fragile chapters, born, expanded, consumed, and finally erased, as though they were never there at all. Consider the vast Pacific, our largest living ocean, covering nearly a third of the Earth. So immense that from space it becomes less a body of water than a mirror for stars. And yet, slow as breath, it shrinks. Along its edges, where the ocean floor dives under land in great arcs, lies the ring of fire, volcanoes arching like beads on a necklace. Each eruption is the faint cry of an ocean being pulled downward, inch by inch into the mantle. Over millions of years, this shrinking will not stop. Trenches will close. Ridges will vanish from maps. What the Pacific once held, its whales, coral kingdoms, drifting plankton blooms, may one day exist only on the margins of another ocean, or in fossils compressed by heat and time. We wonder, quietly, what it must be like for life when the sea itself disappears. Whales accustomed to vast horizons may find those horizons closing. Currents that once fed great migrations may weaken or collapse. The chemical memory of the ocean, its balance of salts, its oxygen, is forever changing, as rivers add minerals and as subduction drags the old water into fire. The ocean breathes in its own way, inhaling carbon from the air, exhaling it in slow exchange, and yet in the end, even the breath of oceans is temporary. Geology reveals this truth with eerie softness. High in the middle of continents, seashells appear where no tide has ever touched in human memory. Entire ocean beds now stand as plateaus and deserts, their waves erased but their story preserved in limestone cliffs. Fossils of ammonites, spiral-shelled drifters of ancient seas, press against the rock record like whispers that the ocean was once here, lapping at shores long dissolved into dust. Could it be that every desert we walk is an ocean's ghost? Could every mountain ridge conceal the seabed of a vanished world? Time erodes the boundaries we take for granted. Seas are made and remade, not for us but for the planet's ceaseless movement. Not because the Earth holds malice, but because it holds motion. Not because oceans are weak, but because nothing, not even an ocean that spans half the planet, resists entropy forever. The idea is unsettling, and yet, there is a strange calm in it, too. The oceans close and then elsewhere new ones bloom. Water finds new basins. Shorelines are redrawn. The memory remains, even if the body itself is gone. And so, when we look at the Pacific today, wide and alive with storms, it is easy to think of permanence. But in another vision, another scale of time, it is already fading into memory, its floor sinking back into the mantle, its boundaries folding inward. Maybe, someday, a traveler in that faraway future will stand in the interior of the reunited continents and hold a fossil in their hand, a small spiral of shell pressed into sandstone, and realize that what once filled the world with waves has become silence. And yet, if entire oceans can be swallowed and erased, if blue horizons can truly disappear, then what else? Hidden in our maps, in our histories, in our own fragile cultures, might also dissolve and leave behind nothing but a whisper. And yet, if oceans can close and vanish into silence, if the blue horizons we know can be erased, then what rises in their absence? When the seas withdraw and continents draw together, the very heart of that new land becomes a place untouched by waves, unreachable by rains. Here, at the center of this reunited world, a superdesert is born. It is not like the deserts we know today, confined to latitudes or corners of the globe, but something vast, endless, stretching across the middle of a continent so large that the sea itself cannot reach it. It is a desert not of choice, but of inevitability. We might try to imagine it, though imagination alone can barely hold its size. A vast inland of dust and stone, longer than any horizon we have ever seen, stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. No breeze carries salt here. No river travels far enough to quench its thirst. The air is dry, rainless, shaped by sun and silence, and every grain of sand moves not by hours or days but by centuries, sculpting dunes that march across landscapes like slow, shifting oceans. The desert at the heart of such a supercontinent is not only geography, it is memory of the sea that once existed, translated into dust. Life, fragile but stubborn, would still carve out its attempts to endure here. Microbes in the soil, hidden away in shadows of rock. Insects buried in burrows that know how to wait for decades before scarce rains. Plants folding tight against themselves, conserving every drop of moisture. Their presence becomes less about thriving and more about persistence, persistence against odds shaped not just by chance, but by the gravitational weight of a continent's union. Could it be that such life is less about survival of the strongest, and more the endurance of the patient? Waiting out thousands of years the way dunes wait, the way stones wait, until change comes again. The Earth's atmosphere shifts here too. Without oceans to cool and moisten, the winds carry heat inland but rarely bring release. Isotopes sealed into ancient soil particles could one day tell the story, capturing in their chemistry the trace of aridity, the weight of drought written in oxygen ratios, carbon locked in dust. Hyperarid climates like this leave marks not only on the land, but in the rock record, in layers of evaporites, in the crystallized residue of vanished lakes. These future rocks will one day whisper to scientists that a great desert once stood at the center of Earth's joined lands, silent and unbroken, as though the planet itself had forgotten water. Philosophically, the idea lingers with unease. What is a desert, truly? Is it absence, a lack of water, or is it a presence, the deep patience of wind and dust? Perhaps both. There is power in what is missing, just as much as in what is abundantly present. The desert forces us to notice silence, not because it is lifeless, but because its life is so rare, so hidden, so well adapted to forgetting that anything else was ever possible. We often think of forests as memory and oceans as memory, but deserts, too, remember. They remember absence, erasure, the pulling away of seas, and they hold onto that emptiness as a form of truth. Walking through an endless desert would be like moving through time itself, each step a repetition that blurs into the next, each horizon looking like the one before. The mind drifts under skies so wide that they surpass thought, until even our own sense of being becomes dust-like, scattered, eroded at the edges. Maybe this is the lesson of deserts. Not just survival, but surrender, the reminder that we too are as temporary as grains carried in great winds. If a super desert were to rise in the fusion of continents, it would be less a landscape than a philosophy made visible, the earth reminding us of its silence. And yet, if the heart of a continent can hold nothing but dry air and silence, if deserts can enlarge into continents unto themselves, then what of the margins? What of the edges of this superworld, where land finally meets the sea, where moisture gathers again, and life may flourish in green borders against the vast interior dust? And yet, if the heart of this vast continent is given over to silence and dust, then its edges tell an opposite story. Along the places where land still leans against the sea, moisture gathers once more. Rainfall drifts in from great waters, carried by clouds that will not dare the long journey inland. They surrender themselves here, at the rim of the world, where the continent's outward skin remains fertile. In this fragile boundary, forests rise, green curtains stretched against the immensity of the interior desert. Each tree becomes not just a body of wood and leaves, but a marker of division, a sentinel at the border between life's insistence and the desert's patience. Roots press into damp soil softened by ocean breezes. Trunks thicken with decades, some with centuries, carving their age into rings of memory. At night, the canopy hums with unseen voices, winds whispering, insects scattering, animals moving quietly through shadows. These forests carry within them the sound of survival not as force, but as balance, a careful dance sustained by their nearness to the sea. Science reminds us of the reason for this fragile line. Moisture depends on circulation. Winds lose their weight of water with each mile they travel inland, until nothing remains to fall, and the heart of the continent is left in drought. The physics of rainfall dictates life's boundaries. Isotopic trails in ancient leaf wax and the chemistry of old soils tell us where clouds once surrendered their final drops. In the geological record of previous supercontinents, thin bands of coal, fossilized pollen, imprints of roots all lie near the coasts, while inland stone bears only sand and salt. Even in memory, rain does not travel far. Yet forests are not only geology written in the present, but philosophy pressed into form. They are reminders that abundance leans on limits. Not because the earth is cruel, but because it is cyclical. Not because deserts forbid life, but because moisture must be localized, fleeting, released. Perhaps that is why forests at the rim of vast continents grow not only as ecosystems but as sanctuaries, places where entropy holds back a little longer, where life gathers at the frontier. Could it be that our sense of sacredness in lush places comes not only from beauty, but from the knowledge, subtle, hidden, that greenery is always temporary and always precarious? We might imagine the edge of such a forest, its green expanse fading step by step into stretches of yellow, then brown, until all color except dust has vanished. To walk that threshold would be to walk through epochs compressed. The breath of water falling away, the voices of forests gradually swallowed in silence, the pulse of fertility fading into the endless patience of sand. For every tree that holds itself upright at this border, there are millions that cannot survive past that line, a frontier drawn not by soil alone, but by air, by distance, by the physics of sky. And yet still, the earth remembers. In the fossil record of ancient supercontinents, pollen appears in thin threads alongside the footprints of creatures that lived in the damp margins. Charcoal hints at ancient fires, storms fed by ocean winds, and rivers that trickled into deserts only to vanish. These records tell us that the forests at the rim are not accidents, but inevitabilities. Moisture clings to the edges of gathered land like memory clings to a dream. And just as dreams melt when we awaken, forests melt into dryness, held only briefly, remembered only partly, before the desert claims dominion beyond. And so we are left to wonder, if the boundaries of life are always this fragile, balanced on the rim of continents, stitched along coastlines, then what else exists only in margins? What other forms of abundance appear only at the edges before fading into silence? And if forests can cling only to the rim of the world, stitched thinly along the coasts where the oceans lend them breath, then what of the skies that drift above? For when the continents gather as one, it is not only land and sea that are rewritten, it is the atmosphere itself. Winds and currents travel differently across such distances, bending into unfamiliar paths. Rain falls in new patterns, storms are born in unlikely places, and glaciers may bloom where ice was never meant to be. Climate, ever patient, does not resist this change. It becomes a quiet painter at its easel, and the canvas of Earth is offered once more to be redrawn. To live in such a world would mean living under altered rhythms. Monsoons, once guided by oceans and their contrasts of warm and cool, would break far from their old homelands. The heart of the continent, dry and barren, would feel almost nothing of their touch, while the edges, more fragile, might be drowned in rains too heavy, too sudden, too relentless to seem familiar. Winds that once streamed predictably across long open waters would strike against cliffs and mountain ranges raised by colliding plates, scattering their energy, twisting into patterns that no chart could anticipate. And with every breath, the sky would carry memory of a world rearranged. The world of ice, too, would no longer belong where we expect it. Gravity and heat flows would move differently when landmass is rebalanced. Ice sheets could creep over landscapes where tropical forests once thrived, while places that knew the press of glaciers for ages may finally be freed. In cores of ancient ice, the isotopes of oxygen carry testimony of such shifts. Oxygen 16, oxygen 18, signatures written into frozen time, telling us that the breath of climate never stands still, that every age is a note in a wider symphony of change. We can read these trails like the faint lines of memory written into the Earth's circulatory system, each layer a faint whisper of air long since exhaled. And perhaps the most haunting truth is that cycles are not broken. They are reshaped, restretched, but they remain cycles, eternal in their patience. The carbon once swallowed by oceans and forests still makes its rounds, drifting into stone, into atmosphere, into water, into breath, only to circle back again in another form, another age. Climate is not linear, never was. It folds and loops, it repeats itself in variations, as though the Earth is endlessly practicing the same melody but changing the tempo and the tone. Maybe not. Maybe these cycles are not repetition but memory, the lingering of what the planet itself has once experienced and carries forward as a kind of unspoken knowledge. We often think of weather as present, fleeting, gone as soon as it passes overhead. But climate is memory stretched long, memory made planetary. It is erosion written on mountainsides, dunes marching inward on quiet feet, cold pressing into deep stone, water carving valleys over epochs. The Earth is not blank when it paints anew. It always paints over the faint traces of its older canvases, never fully erasing them, always leaving ghosts visible in the background if we look closely enough. The question, then, is not if climates will change, but how they will rearrange when the world itself is folded back into one. Will deserts sprawl further than they already imagine? Will forests shrink to mere outlines hugging the sea? Will oceans trade their currents, forgetting the Gulf Stream, inventing new rivers of heat across their changed faces? And in places where no glacier has ever crawled, will ice spread its pale silence, leaving behind in future rocks the imprint of an age we have never witnessed? And so, climate becomes an artist, but also an archivist, preserving its past brushstrokes even as it tries new ones. We are left to wonder, in this vast, rejoined Earth, if the very seasons are shifted, if the very winds remap themselves, then how much of what we believe is permanent, monsoons, trade winds, rains, even spring itself, are really only passing arrangements waiting quietly to be redrawn again. And if climates can be painted anew upon the canvas of a rejoined Earth, then life, bound to that shifting rhythm, must adapt or vanish. For whenever continents gather, the rules of survival change. Seas once held creatures apart, isolating them in evolutionary solitude, shaping them with the patience of millions of years. But when lands weld together, those separations dissolve. Boundaries fall away, and with their loss comes both a spark of possibility and a shadow of collapse. It is not violence alone that erases species. Sometimes it is crowding, the quiet suffocation of too many beings forced together in spaces where no balance has ever existed. Imagine the borders as they vanish. Creatures that once roamed in ancient forests of what was South America may suddenly find themselves facing animals from distant Asian plains. Diseases, invisible threads of life too small to see, leap into new bodies unprepared for them. Parasites, crafted by long intimacy with one host, spill into unfamiliar ones. Predators extend their range, discovering prey with no defense against them. And all of these meetings, all of these collisions, carry weight not in a single year, nor even 1,000, but across deep time. Slowly, steadily, ecosystems once intricate and stable unravel under the pressure of introductions they were never meant to endure. The fossil record bears witness to this truth. During the Great Permian Collapse, so many species vanished that it is remembered as the Great Dying. More than 90% of marine life, more than 70% of land dwellers, gone. What remains speaks not only of disaster but of crowding. Oceans becoming shallow, continents colliding, climates shifting in ways that stripped niches bare. The joining of lands did not make the world larger for life, but smaller, pressed inward until too many forms of existence could no longer survive in their old ways. Could it be that even abundance can destroy when abundance is forced into the wrong space? Perhaps extinction by crowding is not loud, not dramatic. It may not announce itself in sudden catastrophe but in slow fading, the dwindling of ranges, the quiet death of populations too small to matter from the distance of centuries. Insects that once carried pollen lost among forests may vanish when forest lines retreat. Amphibians sensitive to climate shifts may falter under subtle changes to rainfall cycles. Large creatures, pressed into uneven territories, may outcompete one another until nothing remains but silence. And it is this silence that endures, recorded not in voices but in absence, in species that once filled a space but now leave only trace fossils as memory. The Earth has always accepted these losses, not because it is careless, but because it is unendingly fluid. Species vanish, niches close, but in time new ones emerge. It is easy for us to think of extinction as tragedy alone, yet in deep time it is part of the rhythm, entropy dissolving one pattern so another might emerge. But for us, for human eyes, the thought lingers uncomfortably. If continents converge again, will our forests, our savannas, our oceans endure the jostling of crowding? Or will our own presence, so densely multiplied, become the catalyst for the unraveling? Maybe, maybe not. But the question does not fall away. It waits, pressed quiet under the weight of possibility. And yet, if life can be erased by gathering too closely, if extinction can ripple outward from simple proximity, then perhaps the truest memory written into Earth's layers is not only of creation, but of loss. And if this much can be lost by contact alone, what other silences might lie dormant, waiting to surface, when continents stitch themselves together once again? And yet, if extinction can bloom quietly from the weight of crowding, then what of the spaces where life withdraws entirely, not through competition, but through absence? At the very heart of the supercontinent, silence becomes its own environment. Far from any coast, farther still from the pulse of the ocean, there lies a reach of land where no tide has touched for millions of years, where winds carry almost no trace of moisture, where clouds thin and dissolve in exhaustion before they can arrive. This is the interior silence, not noisy with collapse, but heavy with emptiness. Here, days blaze without reprieve, not broken by the calm promise of rain, and nights cool into hollow stillness, the air sharp and brittle against the skin of stone. Rivers that begin near the edges never endure the journey inward. Their waters evaporate or sink into desert basins, leaving behind cracked lakebeds and bitter crusts of salt. To stand here would feel like standing within time itself. Each grain of sand, each shiver of heat across the horizon, carrying the patience of epochs. Even sound seems rare, as if echo has nothing to cling to in so much openness. Science tells us why this silence endures. Circulating winds lose their burden of water before they could ever reach so far. Oceans, the great engines of climate, are too distant. The heart of the continent is cut off from the living breath of tides, and so entropy sculpts instead. Sand grinds stone into finer sand. Dust lifted skyward travels outward on winds that seed distant seas, leaving absence heavier here with every century. In time, rocks birthed of ancient mountains are worn down to plains so flat that even memory itself seems scraped smooth. And yet this empty stillness is not entirely without presence. Life clings in small gestures, like in learning to sip condensation from stone before dawn, nocturnal insects stirring briefly beneath the cooled sand, bacteria hiding deep below ground in fractures where some forgotten moisture still lingers. Their presence is faint, their voices hushed, but they endure because they must. Not because conditions welcome them, but because the earth has a way of populating even desolation with the stubbornness of existence. Perhaps silence is never total. Perhaps it is simply a waiting, a pause between voices, a canvas stretched wide across which life will one day write again. Philosophically, silence unsettles us. We imagine sound as constant, waves, winds, voices, but here the silence of the land seeps inward. Walking deep into such an interior, cut off from ocean rhythms, from the cries of gulls or the whisper of waves, one might feel the collapse of scale, the realization of just how large and indifferent this world can be. Could it be that the silence itself is the truest sound of the earth, the baseline hum we only hear when everything else has been stripped away? Maybe this is not absence at all, but memory at its most distilled. The great interior silence endures because entropy insists upon it. Oceans may return to other boundaries, forests may flourish at the coasts, glaciers may come and go, but the middle waits, wide and hollow, a reminder of what is lost when water retreats. And yet, if silence lives at the center, filling it with emptiness, then what ripples outward, what breath of rivers, what shifted currents shape the edges beyond, where life must renegotiate its flow. And yet, if silence fills the heart of the continent, stretching wide and hollow, what becomes of the waters that try to escape its reach? Rivers gather themselves in high ranges and trickle downward as they always have. But without familiar coastlines to meet, without oceans positioned where they once were, their courses falter. Water learns to wander in ways it has never wandered before. Some rivers will twist endlessly across new plains, curling upon themselves like questions with no endings. Others will spill into shallow basins, never finding a sea, becoming inland lakes destined to evaporate in the sun. A few may carve long scars across stone, pushing toward boundaries that no longer exist. To live in this time would be to watch water itself appear unsettled, confused by a world rearranged. Rivers are more than channels for water. They are carriers of memory, carrying with them fragments of mountains worn away, bits of soil, the skeletons of leaves, the hidden chemistry of isotopes that preserve the echo of precipitation long past. When they shift, the story of entire landscapes shifts with them. Where once they met the ocean in great deltas, feeding estuaries with sediment that nurtured thousands of lives, they now may find only dryness awaiting them. In sediments left uncarried, nutrients fail to move. Fertile coastlines vanish without these deliveries, and ecosystems must relearn how to breathe without the steady exhalation of the rivers that shaped them. What we know as balance breaks not through destruction, but through absence of flow. Maybe rivers are less bodies of water than they are voices in a conversation between land and sea. And when that conversation falters, both speakers begin to change. The seas themselves will not resist alteration. With coastlines redrawn into a single long edge, circulation stumbles. Currents, once guided by differences in salinity, temperature, and geography, will lose their reliable paths. The great conveyor belts of the ocean, those deep loops that move heat and nutrients across the globe, may stall or reroute in strange directions. Perhaps the Atlantic equivalent in this future world would fail entirely, as the push of water no longer finds its anchor, or perhaps it would reappear elsewhere, an unfamiliar river of salt moving through unfamiliar depths. And with it, life that has grown along its stable patterns will be faced with a new script. Coral reefs bleached not by heat alone but by starvation. Plankton forced to bloom at different intervals. Whales adrift in seas that no longer guide them with chemical trails they once trusted. Such stifling is not violence. It is not sudden collapse. It is the slowing heartbeat of a world where geography has shifted its rhythm. Nutrients settle instead of being carried. Waters stagnate where before they pulsed. The sea, once restless in movement, becomes strangely muted, as though waiting for a new arrangement to set it into motion once again. Geologists studying those future sediments would see the evidence. Layers starved of organic matter, shells thinner, isotopic ratios tilted quietly toward imbalance. Stone remembering that rivers ceased their delivery, that currents paused, that the link between land and sea loosened for an age. Philosophically, such stillness unsettles. For we are used to the image of water as eternal motion. We think of rivers flowing endlessly, always finding their way to the ocean, and of oceans constantly in circulation. To imagine them stifled is to imagine a world where breath has been shortened, where the circulation of a planet slows. Is it possible that the greatest silence of all is not found in deserts, but in waters that no longer move? Could a sea in stillness be more haunting than a desert's emptiness? The echo of former currents like ghosts pressing against the mind of the earth? Not because water has vanished, but because its purpose has been interrupted. And yet the patience of deep time teaches us another truth. Nothing remains stifled forever. Just as continents drift apart after their long embrace, so too will rivers carve new paths, and currents, though muted, will find new equilibrium in their own language of motion. It may take millions of years, but the earth remembers how to breathe. The only question that lingers is what life will remain to translate those new breaths, who will adapt to their strange pulses, and who will disappear into the silence left behind. And so, if rivers cannot keep their old paths, if seas lose the rhythm of their currents, if water itself seems hesitant in a world remade, then what rises instead? Perhaps it is mountains, summoned by the crushing of plates, ranges lifting from the surface as new monuments of collision. And so, if rivers lose their path and oceans falter in their currents, where does all that restless movement find release? The answer lies in places where continents kiss, pressing against each other with slow insistence. Here, the ground has no choice but to rise. Stone folds against stone, crust bends and fractures, and in that unhurried violence, mountains are born. Not in a single moment, not in a year or even a century, but in waves of uplift so stretched across time that no living creature could ever watch their complete arrival. And yet they come, and yet they rise. To imagine this is to imagine patience solidified. When plates collide, one may dive beneath the other, subducted into darkness, melted into magma, its memory recycled in fire. But at certain seams, neither plate yields. The Earth's stubbornness presses upward instead, layers upon layers stacked until ridges become peaks, and peaks reach so high that they scrape the winds themselves. Snow gathers on these newborn summits long before valleys below have even learned their names. And the mountains stand like monuments not to sudden creation, but to the enduring persistence of pressure. Geology tells us their story in folds and faults, in minerals crushed under unimaginable weight. Each granite face, each metamorphic seam is a diary of collision, its crystals realigning under pressure, preserving a memory of the moment one continent pressed into another. Fossils found high on ridges remind us that what is now alpine wind was once shallow sea. Shells of ammonites, corals, and ancient plankton are carried miles above their homes, entombed in new stone, silent proofs that mountains are not only monuments, They are palimpsests, landscapes recycled, oceans compressed into sky. Could it be that what we call permanence is always only transformation? There is something almost human in mountains born of collision. They stand where boundaries cease to settle, where compromises cannot be made, where upward becomes the only choice. Their presence feels eternal to us, in part because our lifespans are too small to see their rising or their falling. But in the eyes of Earth, they too are temporary. Erosion begins its quiet work the instant peaks are raised. Rivers cut channels into their sides. Ice carves valleys with patient force. Winds polish their ridges grain by grain. Mountains rise only to be undone, their heights reduced to sediments. Their proud shapes softened and scattered downstream until they are sands on a beach, clays in a basin, memory broken into particles. Not because mountains are fragile, but because entropy touches everything, no matter how tall, no matter how strong. And yet, during the span they endure, they alter all else around them. They shift winds that must travel over their peaks, birthing monsoons on one side, leaving deserts on the other. They shape rivers forced to bend around their feet, carving canyons in the process. They even alter climate itself, their white crowns reflecting sunlight, warming and cooling the atmosphere in rhythms that reverberate far beyond their valleys. Mountains are not only symbols. They are engines sculpting weather, water, even life. Evidence of their influence can be read in ancient isotopes of carbon and oxygen, locked in glacier ice, recording when peaks rose high enough to change the planet's breath. And we, walking among them now, sense their silence. It is a silence full of weight, the kind that presses into you, reminding you how small and how brief you are. To stand at the base of a mountain newly born in deep time would be to hear the echo of continents colliding beneath your feet, an echo too slow for human ears, but present all the same. Perhaps this is why mountains have always drawn reverence, why we see gods in their outlines, because something in us recognizes the pressure they embody, the inevitability they represent. And yet, if whole mountains can be lifted from seas and ground into dust again, if stone itself rises and falls as easily as breath, then what else, hidden inside the earth's folds, waits to be surfaced? What memories, long buried, might be pushed upward, revealed, and returned to light when the land itself makes monuments of its collisions? And yet, if mountains can be born from the slow embrace of continents, if stone itself can rise like a memory unwilling to stay buried, then what else comes with it? For what is hidden within stone will not always remain there. When the earth folds upward, it does not lift only cliffs and peaks. It exhumes its past. Fossils, pressed into silence beneath layers of rock for hundreds of millions of years, are suddenly lifted into light again. Bones turn to stone, shells transform to mineral, imprints of leaves long disintegrated. All once sealed in darkness now breathe once more, not alive, but not entirely gone either. They are whispers, reminders that oceans once covered mountains, that jungles once stood where sand drifts now, that extinction does not erase, but rather translates, turning flesh and bark and wing into permanence. The process is never gentle, nor is it sudden. It is both patient and unrelenting. When continents merge, entire layers of Earth are thrust downward into subduction zones, lost to fire, while other layers are hoisted upward into view. In those lifted layers lie the residues of vanished worlds. Ammonites, spiral-shaped and intricate, may emerge from limestone that once belonged to a shallow sea. Ferns pressed flat into shale may speak of humid valleys that have no present equivalent. In some seams, even the faint impressions of raindrops might be found, their tiny circles preserved across epochs, fossilized exhalations of a sky that once fell upon a very different Earth. The science of it is clear, yet the wonder it stirs refuses to stay only in facts. To hold a fossil in one's hand is to touch deep time itself, to grasp something that has waited longer than language or memory for its reappearance. Isotopes within these ancient remains, carbon, oxygen, strontium, still carry signatures of climates no one witnessed, seas no one remembers, air no creature now alive has ever breathed. Each specimen is a diary not only of the creature it once was, but of the world it inhabited. Could it be that fossils are less remnants of death and more fragments of memory, encoded in stone not because life wished to be remembered, but because Earth itself does not easily forget? There is tenderness in this exchange. The fossilized shell lifted high upon a mountain ridge still carries the faint spiral it once grew as an animal in a sea. The petrified trunk standing in desert silence still bears the lines of its growth rings, each ring recalling seasons that passed in long-vanished climates. They were buried not to be destroyed, but to rest, until some upheaval in the crust tears back the veil of sediment and allows them to reappear. And we, fragile and temporary creatures ourselves, find them, hold them, study them, dreaming of what they mean. Maybe fossils are not only gifts of science, but mirrors of our own wish not to vanish entirely, our hope that something of us will remain, long after silence overtakes our voices. But for every fossil exposed by the lifting of stone, how many more are swallowed as continents collide? For each ammonite revealed in a cliff, countless others are dragged beneath, subducted into the mantle's fire, erased forever from the record. Fossils teach us not only of what survives into memory, but also of the incompleteness of memory itself. Earth remembers with fragments, never with wholeness. Could it be that forgetting is as essential to the planet as remembering? That loss is not an error, but a rhythm, a cycle through which only hints, only whispers are preserved? And so, when we walk along a mountain trail and run our fingers across a stone imprinted with the ghost of a creature that swam an ancient sea, we are not only touching rock. We are brushing against a memory, half-kept, half-erased, one that has returned for just an instant of deep time's endless flow. And yet, if the Earth can reveal its past with fossils, if it can bring the vanished briefly back into view, what other secrets, buried oceans, forgotten climates, erased worlds, are waiting quietly, just beneath our feet, for the moment they too might be pushed upward into the light? And yet, if fossils reveal whispers of vanished lives, pressed upward from once hidden layers, then oceans too must leave their traces. For even when seas are erased from the surface, they are not forgotten. Their memory is folded down, subducted into the mantle, pulled into the deep shadows of the earth. Entire crusts of ocean floor, once echoing with waves and alive with drifting plankton, are dragged beneath continents, carried into a world of pressure and fire. From above, the ocean is gone. From below, it lingers as a ghost. This ghost ocean does not drift with waves or tides anymore. It exists within minerals, in trapped fluids, in the chemistry of stone itself. The floor of drowned seas bends and breaks as it sinks, carrying its sediments, its salts, even the faint chemical echo of water that once tasted like rain. Later, along volcanic arcs, in eruptions that mark the boundaries where plates grind against one another, these ingredients return, not as seas lapping gently against shores, but as gas and lava, as chemistry reshaped into fire. Basalts and ashes that spill upon the surface carry within them signals of the oceans they devoured, invisible to the eye, but clear to those who know how to read the isotopic script. Could it be that when a volcano exhales, it is also the breath of a sea long vanished, speaking once more after silence? The science is unyielding in its clarity. Water locked within subducted slabs is released into rising magma, fueling eruptions, feeding chains of volcanoes that line the edges of supercontinents. Oceans vanish into trenches, only to haunt the earth elsewhere, their essence transmuted but never erased. And if something as vast as the Pacific can one day be pulled entirely beneath the crust, does that not imply that absence is only another version of memory? Not destruction, but repurposing. We may think of ghosts as ethereal, as insubstantial, but here the ghosts are heavy. Their presence is measured in isotopic fingerprints, traced in strontium and oxygen, stored deep in crystals that formed in magma chambers before solidifying into rock. To hold one of these rocks in your hand is, unknowingly, to hold the trace of an ocean that no longer exists. The sea itself reduced not to silence, but to symbols locked in atomic balance. And this reduction carries a strange humility, reminding us that permanence belongs not to oceans, not to mountains, not even to life, but to transformation itself. Philosophically, Ghost oceans nudge us to reconsider what is lost. We imagine disappearance as final as obliteration. But beneath our feet the planet suggests another truth. Disappearance may only be disguise. The ocean gone from the map has not been erased. It has merged into the Earth's deep interior, becoming something else, hidden yet powerful, silent yet still able to alter the face of continents from below. Could it be that forgetting, for the planet, is always partial? That even in its deepest silences, the Earth remembers through fragments, because it cannot do otherwise? To walk across a volcanic plain, to climb over cooling lava, is to stand on the afterlife of an ocean. Its chemistry, its minerals, its rainwater, have all been given another stage. The tide, once restless, is stilled into stone. But stone itself will erode, breaking back into sand, perhaps one day feeding another future sea, another echo of memory still to come. And yet, if oceans can vanish and still speak through fire, if what is buried beneath us still remembers itself in new forms, then what else might the Earth keep in secret diaries of isotope and stone? What other memories lie hidden, waiting to be read not in water or wave, but in the smallest signatures carried through time, written in particles too small for the eye, but too stubborn to be erased? And yet, if erased oceans can still whisper through fire, if their chemistry lingers in stone and gas long after waves collapse into memory, then perhaps the truest diary of the Earth is written not in landscapes at all, but in the smallest of signatures, its isotopes. They are invisible to our naked eyes, yet they are everywhere, hidden in shells, in sediments, in ice, in the subtle arrangement of atoms. Oxygen, carbon, strontium, and countless others carry with them delicate ratios. A quiet mathematics that records where seas once flooded, where deserts once grew, where climates tipped into heat or fell into ice. Isotopes are not just fragments of chemistry. They are the planet's handwriting. We read them the way one reads poetry, softly, carefully, listening not only to the words but to the pauses between them. Oxygen 1.8 heavier than oxygen 1.6, etched into the layers of glacial ice, tells us how much water evaporated, how much snow fell, how bright or dim the sun's warmth lingered over thousands of winters. In coral reefs both living and fossilized, carbon isotopes carry the resonance of atmospheric change, encoding when carbon dioxide filled the air and when forests drew it back into their green breath. Strontium, dissolved long ago into oceans, shifts its ratios as rivers erode mountains and continents join or break apart. Its subtle balance tracing the memory of ancient geography with more honesty than any human map. Could it be that in these numbers lies a voice, soft but persistent, a voice reminding us that forgetting is only an illusion, that the Earth has never stopped remembering itself? The rhythm is hypnotic. Oxygen isotopes cycle as climate cycles. Carbon scatters with every forest that lives, dies, and petrifies into coal. Strontium hums with the slow rearrangement of continents. Not because the planet seeks to keep a record, but because all matter participates in memory. Every raindrop, every exhalation, every buried animal carries within it the possibility of being distilled one day into data, read long after its presence is gone. When we find these isotopes and measure them, is it not a little like listening to the Earth's heartbeat played on the quietest instrument? Barely audible, yet utterly steady. Philosophically, this intimacy unsettles us. We often imagine that time erases absolutely, that nothing of the past remains except in story. But isotopes remind us that the Earth itself is the story. It has no need for mythology because its tissues, stone, air, water, preserve memory in their very chemistry. Even deserts record change. Their dust, carried across continents, delivers isotopic ratios into faraway oceans, spreading secrets of aridity into plankton shells thousands of kilometers distant. Even silence becomes communicative in this way. Could it be that the planet itself is incapable of silence, that even in its stillness it continues to speak, only in languages most of us cannot hear? To hold this idea is to see time differently, not as a line, nor even as a cycle, but as a script layered upon itself countless times. Each isotope is a letter, a fragment of a word, Together they form sentences, whole passages, telling us not only what happened but how it felt to the earth itself. Our own role is less that of authors and more that of readers stumbling into an unfinished poem, one where verses stretch millions of years in length, verses where oceans, deserts, glaciers, and forests all take their turn holding the pen. And so, as we peer into the chemistry of fossils, of glaciers, of rocks lifted high above forgotten seas, we are not simply decoding numbers. We are cradling memories, memories so vast and so patient that they make our own lives feel like single flickers, moments of warmth in a much larger, much older flame. And yet, if isotopes are truly the Earth's diary, subtle and elegant, then what else might be written between their lines? What silences lie not in the ratios themselves, but in the gaps, the pages torn out by subduction and fire, the missing verses of a poem too large for us to read in its entirety. And yet, if isotopes are the Earth's diary, etched into stone and water with patience beyond measure, then what of the ink that moves of its own will? Life itself becomes part of the handwriting, scattering its traces across even the most desolate corners. For even where deserts stretch unbroken, even where oceans close and silence reigns in the core of great continents, life finds ways to cling. Not in abundance, not in lush forests or swarming seas, but as threads running through the edges of possibility. Here we find strange survivors, microbes deep within rocks, feeding not on sunlight, but on chemical whispers of minerals fractured far below the surface. Lichens painting stone with pale crusts, pulling sustenance from mere air and dust, patient beyond human reckoning. Extremophiles greeting what seems unlivable not as barrier but as opportunity, adapting to radiation, to drought, to salts we would think unbearable. In their persistence, a quiet message emerges. Life is not only about flourishing, it is about enduring, about insisting on presence even where the planet withdraws its generosity. Science has traced these organisms to the strangest hidden places. In deserts, they crust the underside of rocks, invisible until overturned. Beneath the floor of oceans swallowed in subduction, microbial colonies live in fractures heated by mantle warmth, their metabolism slower than any heartbeat, slower than any pulse, yet steady enough to last ages. In polar deserts, extremophiles burrow inside crystals of salt or ice, clinging to just enough water for survival. Each of these is a declaration written softly. Life does not ask permission, it does not ask for kindness, it simply persists. Could it be that this persistence is the truest definition of memory? Not because the earth wishes to remember, but because life, by existing, leaves behind echoes of itself. Fossil pollen carried across dunes, microbial isotopes altering the chemistry of rocks, pigments and trace molecules that last long after the organisms themselves are gone. In such artifacts, the margin speaks, and perhaps the margins always speak, whispering even when the wide heart of the planet falls empty. There is also wonder in their fragility. These lives are thin, precarious, easily erased, yet they hold on with a determination beyond comprehension. A single shift of climate, a single gust of rare rain, and they bloom for moments before retreating again into dormancy. Maybe this is why their presence feels so moving. They embody not stability, but improvisation. Could it be that life is strongest not in its triumphs, but in its willingness to bend, to fold, to wait? Philosophically, these organisms remind us that no edge is ever final. What we see as boundaries, heat too great, dryness too long, cold too deep, become simply a condition to adapt against. Perhaps it is an illusion to think of margins at all. Perhaps, to life itself, there are no margins, only spaces waiting to be tried. And if it is so on Earth, could it not also be so elsewhere? Could there be microbes hidden in the silence of another planet, another moon, threading themselves into basalt, ice, and dust, as they do here? Life at the margins humbles us because it reveals that living is not the exception but the rule, even in brutality. Not because environments are easy, but because persistence is part of the logic of the universe. Maybe not. But when we look at lichens creeping across a stone, or microbes dividing deep beneath the crust, we are looking at resilience carried into eternity. These are the guardians of survival, the custodians of possibility. And yet, if even in the harshest deserts and the deepest rocks life still threads itself into being, then what becomes of the skies above the superworld? What shapes the clouds and storms when continents rearrange, when forests cling to coasts and deserts swallow the middle? What new handwriting will the atmosphere trace upon this vast, rejoined earth? And yet, if life can persist at the margins, threading itself into stone and surviving in the faintest allowances, then what of the vast canvas above? What of the sky that bends over everything? For when continents merge into one immense body, the atmosphere bends to it as surely as rivers and oceans do. Winds, clouds, and storms no longer follow the paths we know. Their patterns fracture and reassemble, their rhythms rewritten across this new geography. The sky itself becomes unfamiliar, as though the planet has lifted a different pen to continue its script. Today, we believe we know the wind. Jet streams curl predictably across latitudes. Tropical storms coil their spiral bodies across warm seas. Rains fall where monsoons are expected, and dry air rules the deserts we recognize. And yet these patterns are not permanent. They are the consequence of the layout of continents, oceans, mountains, and seas. Change that canvas, and the choreography of the atmosphere must change too. Jets fracture into weaker strands or drift in directions they no longer hold today. Hurricanes, robbed of long open waters to sustain them, might fade or transform into unfamiliar weather systems. Monsoons may ignite over coasts that have never known them, then vanish from places that depended on their pulse for thousands of years. Science sees this written already in the Earth's past. In the age of Pangaea, monsoon systems were colossal, flooding entire regions at once with months of rain, then withdrawing into long dry silences. In other epochs, when continents clustered at high latitudes, glaciers spread in places where no ice exists today, their immense weight depressing crusts and altering winds around them. Clues surface in isotope trails left within ancient stalagmites, in the patterns of dust found far out at sea, and in the layered memory of ice cores. Each record speaks softly of skies once shaped by a world unlike our own. Could it be that the atmosphere remembers too? Not with permanence, but with shifting signatures, each age inscribed in cycles of temperature, circulation, and storm. Philosophically, the thought unsettles and soothes in equal measure. The sky above us feels enduring, but it is as malleable as the land beneath it. Not because the heavens bow to human gaze, but because they bow to geography itself. Our maps of climate, our divisions between temperate and tropical, rainy and arid, are only temporary sketches. If the continents are redrawn, then so too are the clouds. The Earth shows us that nothing is constant, not even the air we breathe, not even the patterns we trust each season to follow. It becomes a reminder that what we call balance is always precarious. The jet stream's dependable flow is fragile, so delicate that a shift in landmass can destabilize it. The rains we treat as lifelines are dependent upon arrangements of continents that, in the scale of deep time, are fleeting moments. What we think of as climate stability may be nothing more than a short pause in the greater turbulence of the planet's breathing. Could it be that, to Earth, turbulence is the norm and balance is the anomaly? And yet, even in its unfamiliar phase, the sky will not stop painting. It will invent new clouds across new mountain ranges, conjure new winds across alien coasts, carve new rhythms of drought and flood. Different, yes. Strange, yes. But alive all the same, weaving another story into the diary of isotopes and dust. Perhaps we forget this too often, that the sky itself is an author, as restless and impermanent as the oceans it reflects. And still, as we imagine standing beneath such a changed atmosphere, with skies that no longer follow the patterns we grew up with, we may begin to wonder. If even the air can be rewritten by shifting land, then what of the life within it and below it? What becomes of those delicate webs pulled between creatures when crowding, collision, and climate press them too close together once again? And yet, if the sky itself can be rewritten, its winds fractured and its storms redrawn by the sweep of a rejoined continent, then what of the deeper law that threads through all things beneath it? Nothing resists disorder for long. This, too, is part of the planet's memory, the quiet unfolding of entropy. On a superworld bound together, entropy becomes not only an invisible force, but the primary sculptor of every horizon, every forest edge, every breath of erosion. It is the patient needle that stitches the fabric of existence, not tightly, but loosely, so that threads always begin to fray. We may look at mountains newly lifted and believe they are firm, but the air is already dismantling them, moment by moment, grain by grain. Rivers grind through stone, glacial ice cracks into valleys, wind scrapes the edges bare. Fossils, once pulled up from strata, do not remain pristine. They weather, they decay, they break. Even the atmosphere itself disperses the very chemistry we leave behind. Carbon rising, settling, recycling, never still. On this super-Earth, clustered and immense, entropy manifests not because the planet is cruel, but because balance is born out of imbalance, and imbalance is inevitable. Crowding itself is a kind of entropy, a disorder of life pressed too close. Creatures encountering one another beyond their evolutionary histories create accidents of disappearance. Slow extinctions carried by contact alone. Parasites spread unchecked. Predators move into landscapes beyond their intended reach. In such chain reactions, entropy becomes ecological, dissolving frameworks of life and redistributing energy into new, unpredictable forms. Maybe not. Maybe such entropic dissolutions sow the seeds for entirely new beginnings, new convergences of life we cannot imagine. Yet even in novelty, the undercurrent is the same, structures leaning toward disorder, pulled back only briefly by the work of adaptation. Philosophically, entropy unsettles because it suggests that nothing lasts, not even the things we believe to be solid. But it also calms because it reveals that endings are not failures, they are continuities. The coastline eroded is not gone. It becomes sand on another beach. A forest decayed is not vanished. It becomes coal laid down in strata for time to press into memory. A body, decomposed, is not erased, but dispersed among microbes, among soils, among airs and waters that hold its once living chemistry. Could it be that entropy is not destruction but reallocation, a gentle undoing that allows each form of matter to become something else? The supercontinent, immense as it seems, is already unraveling the moment it is formed. Its mountains erode while they are still rising. Its deserts expand, filling with dust that will someday drift outward, seeding distant oceans. Its forests retreat to coasts, then splinter and burn, their ashes feeding new cycles. Even tectonic stability betrays itself into instability. Supercontinents are inherently temporary, fractured in time by the mantle's shifting currents. Entropy lays the foundation not only for decay but for renewal, demonstration that nothing is ever still, not even the illusion of permanence on the grandest scale. Our own presence, if humanity should endure to witness that superworld, would not defy entropy either. Our cities, our artifacts, our technofossils, plastics, glass, circuits, will fracture into fragments, drift into sediments, become signals for another intelligence to puzzle over millions of years from now. Perhaps our greatest legacy will not be our endurance, but what entropy does with our remains. The scattering of what we leave written in chemicals, a thin layer in the geological diary, a layer that someday someone or something may find. Entropy teaches us humility not because it ends things, but because it reminds us that no thing ever holds its form forever. Every structure unwinds, every memory dissolves, and yet, in that dissolution, another pattern always emerges. Disorder is nothing but hidden order, stretched out beyond our comprehension. Maybe the earth itself is less concerned with permanence, and more invested in an endless choreography of becoming undone, only to become again in another shape. And so, under skies without familiar patterns, across continents pressed into one another, and within stones that crumble as fast as they climb, entropy becomes a quiet truth. It is not cruel, it is not kind. It is not judge, it is not savior. It is only the law of dispersal, the reminder that all stories stretch outward into fragments, never into stillness. And yet, If this is so, if even the grandest structures of Earth are destined to dissolve under entropy's patience, then what of the traces we leave behind? Our cities, our relics, our inventions? Will they, too, scatter, or might their fragments persist as technofossils, writing a different kind of memory into the rocks? And yet, if entropy wears away even mountains, if stone itself is broken into grains and reassembled into new landscapes, then what of us? What becomes of the traces humanity has scattered across the planet, when time begins to fold continents back together? In the eyes of deep time, we are recent, momentary, yet already our presence has left layers. In fields and cities, on seafloors and in the hollows of deserts, our materials are pressed into the fabric of Earth. Plastics, glass, alloys, fragments of circuitry, they do not dissolve easily. They linger, and in that lingering they write a different kind of fossil record, the technofossil layer. Unlike shells or leaves, these fossils are not carved by nature but by our hands. A shard of silicon buried in clay, a fragment of plastic drifting into sediment, a sliver of steel oxidizing into rust-red veins within stone. All of them may be pressed, compressed, and one day re-exposed as part of geological memory. They will not carry the outline of a creature, not the spiral of an ammonite nor the bone bed of a vanished reptile, but they will carry shape nonetheless. The shape of a bottle, a circuit, a fragment of architecture, a scattering of ash from combustion that altered the sky. Scientists of some distant age, should they exist, may read them as evidence of us. Not because we endured, but because what we made outlived us. Even now, this layer is forming. Oceans cradle microplastics in their depths, pressing them into sediment where they settle alongside the diatoms and foraminifera that mark the natural scale of time. Landfills rise as artificial mountains, their strata already visible. A ribbon of glass, a stratum of metal, a seam of polymers that will not vanish for millennia. As continents drift, these deposits may be carried, buried, and re-exposed, folded upward like the seashells we find on modern mountainsides. Could it be that far into the future, when another great joining occurs, a mountain ridge might yield not a fossil ammonite but the imprint of a plastic fragment, a layer of synthetic chemistry forever fused into stone? Maybe, maybe not. But the thought itself lingers like a shadow. Philosophically, technofossils confront us with an unnerving idea, that our truest legacy may not be art or language or memory, but residue. That what survives from us may not be the story we intended to write, but the byproducts of living, our waste made permanent by geology. It humbles and unsettles us both, to think that the earth, in its patience, may remember us through a broken shoe sole pressed into strata, a swirl of ash locked in ice, a spike of isotopes betraying our rapid combustion of ancient carbon. We may wonder if this is tragedy, or simply continuity. Perhaps it is no different from the coal seams of ancient forests, or the limestone of vanished seas. Life transformed into signal. Our signal just happens to carry the forms of industry, of invention, of velocity. And in that thought there is still a tenderness. For to be part of the record at all is to be acknowledged, however small, however fleeting. Our questions may not survive in language, our stories may not endure in paper or stone, but perhaps what we asked is hidden between the artifacts. A circuit pressed into rock whispers curiosity as surely as it whispers function. A layer of accelerated carbon speaks not only of burning but of urgency, of striving. Could it be that, in the end, our remains, our technofossils, do not simply betray our presence, but betray our longings? And yet, if we leave such marks in the stone, pressed into the same record that holds ammonites, forests, deserts, and oceans, then what else waits to be surfaced? What other memories, deeper and older, might rise alongside our fragments, reminding us that we were never the first to leave our traces, and will not be the last? And yet, if our artifacts may one day rest in stone alongside ammonites and ancient forests, then we are reminded that the greatest artifact of all is not what we build but where we live. For most of human life has leaned close to the sea. Our cultures, our migrations, our myths, they are drawn to the shifting edges where water and land negotiate with one another. But when the continents gather once more, when oceans are erased or diminished, The shorelines we know today will vanish. Beaches we walk now, cliffs we photograph, harbors that shaped empires, they are not permanent. They are temporary outlines written in sand and stone, soon to be smoothed over, swallowed, or left stranded far inland. Forgotten coasts. The earth has done this before. Ancient shorelines run like scars across our continents, raised hundreds of meters above the present sea. In desert plateaus, wave-cut terraces still ripple faintly across the rock. Whispers of tides that once lapped against a coast now more than 1,000 kilometers from the ocean's breadth. Fossils of coral lie embedded in mountains, reminders that reefs once bloomed where glaciers now unfold. Even salt itself remains, a crystalline signal of oceans evaporated. Entire basins sealed off and collapsed to brine. The line where land meets sea is always transient, always falling forward into change. Could it be that even now, as we trace our fingers across a shoreline, we are holding onto something already half gone? And yet, memory lingers in quiet forms. Coral skeletons record the chemistry of the water they grew within, each layer a diary of tides and temperatures. Sea caves carved by waves persist long after the sea retreats, their hollow mouths opening onto landscapes now empty of water but still echoing with the sound they once knew. Beaches of pulverized shells, trapped and stranded far inland by the uplift of mountains or the fall of seas, whisper of tides erased yet carried forward in fragments. The ocean, even in retreat, continues to write its notes in salt, in stone, in hollow ground. This memory humbles. Shorelines we take for granted carry the weight of countless vanishings that came before. What we call the coast is simply the most recent sketch drawn by the hand of water. In deep time, maps reveal themselves as fragile, ephemeral, outlived by the very tides they attempt to capture. Not because they are flawed, but because permanence is not the ocean's design. The sea folds and unfolds in restless rhythm, and in doing so it erases its own borders. Maybe maps are less about fixing space than about confessing our fear that nothing can be fixed. Still, the oceans remember. In isotopes sealed within coral, in faint chemical changes in cave walls, in sediments pressed into estuaries, there exists a record of each tide, each flood, each fall. Scientists hundreds of thousands of years from now may trace these signals, learning not only where coastlines once stood, but what stories they carried: storms, droughts, cycles of abundance and collapse. To read them is to glimpse tides speaking in a different voice, one too slow for us to hear in life, but resonant enough to stir when translated across time. Perhaps this is why shorelines draw us so powerfully. They remind us not just of the contrast between ocean and land, but of the instability between them. Standing at the edge of the sea is always standing at the edge of time, watching boundaries shift, feeling in our own bodies the pull of forces so much greater than us. Could it be that tides remain in us as memory too, imprinted in our salt, our water, our restless desire to move and return, to leave and come back again? And yet, if coasts can vanish and tides can be remembered only in salt and hollow stones, then what of the forces beneath that sculpt them still? What of the volcanic breath that rises below, reshaping shorelines not with water but with fire? And yet, if coasts can vanish and tides leave only whispers in caves and salt, then what of the restless engine beneath them, the fire that has never slept? For when continents draw together, the weight of their union presses upon the mantle below, and the earth answers. Volcanic breath thickens. Superplumes push upward, great columns of heat rising from deep within the planet's interior. Their journey longer than human history, their destination inevitable. Lithosphere cracks, and fire finds speech. Lava spills like punctuation at the edges of a drifting sentence, as though the planet itself must pause and exhale. We think of volcanoes as sudden, as catastrophic, but in deep time their rhythm is slow and certain. They are not interruptions but expressions, the surface revealing what has long been stirring far below. A supercontinent, immense and heavy, disrupts circulation in the mantle. Heat, trapped and redirected, seeks release in fewer places. When it does, the release is colossal. Great volcanic chains light vast sections of sky, ash falling like snow across landscapes already reshaped by drought and flood. Not because the earth rages, but because it breathes, and breathing always means both inhalation and exhalation. The science makes this visible, though always faintly. Ancient layers of basalt sprawling across today's continents, India's Deccan Traps, Siberia's vast flood basalts, are the fingerprints of superplumes that once rose with relentless persistence. Within them lie isotopic signals of subducted oceans, ghosts of water fueling eruptions long after seas themselves had closed. Fossils buried in those layers tell us of worlds abruptly silenced, ecosystems choked not just by fire but by the gases exhaled. Sulfur that dimmed the sun, carbon dioxide that thickened the sky until climates swung wildly. Such layers are reminders that volcanic breathing is not gentle, yet neither is it random. It is the planet clearing its throat, assuring balance in ways both creative and destructive. And philosophically, this pulse haunts us because it shifts our understanding of permanence. Mountains carved slowly are undone with patience, but a superplume rewrites landscapes in an instant of geological time. Entire regions buried, oceans acidified, skies altered in both light and color. Could it be that Earth itself requires eruption, that it needs these intervals of fire to renew its cycles, to push nutrients outward, to fracture continents from within as surely as it joins them from without? Maybe, maybe not. But the evidence lingers in every volcanic plateau, in every cooled basalt plain, in every banded rock that still carries the chemical memory of fire. Yet even the destruction holds a strange fertility. Volcanic ash, spread across continents by winds, enriches soils, feeding forests when silence returns. Lava fields crack and weather, and in their fractures life begins. A moss, a lichen, the first roots of future trees. Out of molten rock comes new possibility, reminding us that decay and creation are braided together, never separate. Fire is not final. It is foundation, and when continents press together, amplifying its breath, fire seems less an intruder than an inevitable companion to union. Atmospheric change, too, is written in volcanic ink. Sulfur hazes dim light for years, cooling the Earth's skin, while carbon injections alter the rhythm of heat for centuries. Climate, sky, and fire intertwine, each responding to the other in cycles of flux we can only dimly trace. Perhaps this is one reason why even long after the last eruption, layers of ice and ocean sediments still preserve volcanic whispers. Ash shards microscopic yet precise, isotopic anomalies that betray a short interruption in balance. Earth remembers its fire always. And so, as we imagine standing on the surface of this supercontinent, beneath skies dimmed by fiery exhalations, above stones hot with recent flow, we must accept that fire is not an interruption but a pulse, one that cannot be stilled. Not because the Earth chooses violence, but because it chooses life, circulation, renewal. Lava is written into the story as surely as water, wind, and dust. And yet, if fire itself is the punctuation to Earth's drifting sentence, reshaping continents with every exhalation, then what of the lives caught between these breaths? What of the species that vanish in silence after the sky has been thickened with ash? And yet, if fire is the punctuation in Earth's drifting sentence, shaping continents with sudden exhalations of ash and magma, then it is the silence afterward that lingers longest. For not every end comes with flame or fury. More often, extinction waits quietly, an erasure that arrives not as a single event but as a slow withdrawal. Habitats fade, niches collapse, species vanish with no announcement at all. On this imagined superworld, where boundaries of sea and land are redrawn, where climates stagger through new rhythms, extinction may spread less like an explosion and more like an echo, a fading hum that passes unnoticed until it can no longer be ignored. Life has survived upheavals before. Fossils tell us of the Ordovician seas, emptied by cooling and shifts in ocean chemistry. They tell us of the Permian silence, when more than 90% of species were gone, not in a single instant, but through waves of starvation, heat, stagnation. They tell us of the Cretaceous, when forests smoldered and dinosaurs dwindled, the sky changed by dust and gas until ecosystems unraveled. Each extinction has its own character, but they share a rhythm, the gradual narrowing of possibility. Not because the Earth intends loss, but because the conditions of existence are so fragile they cannot hold every form forever. In the silence after volcanic fire, plants wither for lack of sunlight. But long after skies clear, there are other pressures. Coasts that no longer exist, rivers that shift, climates that draw rain away from once fertile valleys. Grasslands shrink, forests retreat. Species that relied on subtle balances falter. Insects deprived of pollen, amphibians stranded without water, fish left in rivers that can no longer reach the sea. Extinction in this way is a bookkeeping of absence, an unnoticed subtraction carried out species by species, until the web tears through at last. Could it be that silence itself is the most constant extinction event, invisible while it unfolds, irreversible when finally revealed? Even then, some traces always endure. In stone we find pollen from forests long gone, spores from plants that did not return. We find shells of creatures erased from the sea's memory, and isotopes shifted in layers of rock to signal vanished climates. These fragments do not call out loudly, but they persist. Perhaps extinction is not end alone but translation, into memory, into chemistry, into absence catalogued by the Earth. Maybe the truest echo of life is not survival, but its imprint when it falls silent. Philosophically, this unsettles our sense of continuity. We often imagine life as a ladder, each rung leading upward, but extinction reminds us that the ladder is broken again and again, that each silence dethrones what once seemed permanent. Dinosaurs, ammonites, trilobites, all dominant in their time, all erased into fossils that say less about presence than about absence. Could it be that every age exists already with its extinction waiting inside it, folded into its foundation? Maybe, maybe not. But we live with that possibility, whether we acknowledge it or not. And in this superworld, the risk is heightened. Crowding species into one great landmass, shifting climates, stifling currents. All invite extinctions not abrupt, but creeping. A bird that cannot cross a growing desert, a plant that cannot survive the turn of rainfall, a predator that finds prey has thinned beyond recovery. None vanish in spectacle. They fade instead, slowly leaving behind silence, reminding the Earth that it has carried more forms of life than it keeps, more possibilities than it allows to remain. And yet, if loss unfolds so quietly, if silence steals species before we even learn their names, what truths lie buried in stone, in chemistry, in the deep memory of the planet? What other stories of vanished lives might still be retrieved, waiting not in forests or seas, but in the enduring layers of rock that record everything, even absence? And yet, if extinction waits in stillness, erasing life not with fire but with silence, then how is such absence recorded? It is not preserved by memory carried in voices or stories. It is remembered by the Earth itself, written into stone. For geology is not a blank surface. It is a library, layered endlessly, every stratum a page holding not just events, but the moods, the rhythms, the pauses of a planet as it drifts through deep time. Stone does not speak quickly, but it speaks with permanence. Imagine walking along a cliff face, the kind that towers silently above a quiet shoreline. To most eyes, its colors are only shades of brown, gray, red. But to a slower gaze, those colors are a timeline, layers pressed one atop another, each holding fragments of memory. Here, a thin stripe of ash, fallen from a volcano that darkened the sky long ages past. There, a line of fossil shells, a once abundant reef now stranded hundreds of meters above today's sea. Higher still, a band where iron has stained the stone, signaling an atmosphere that once carried more oxygen, a breath of the world long since exhaled. Every layer is both testimony and pause, the Earth keeping an unbroken account of its becoming. Science allows us to read this handwriting. Ratios of isotopes mark shifts in climate cycles. Oxygen recording ice ages, carbon recording forests rising and falling, strontium recording the grind of mountains as they wear into rivers. Tiny changes in chemistry, invisible to the eye, become echoes of glacial advances, monsoon shifts, vanished oceans. To hold a piece of ancient rock is to hold not just mineral, but story. A climate remembered, an extinction written, a silence preserved. Could it be that stone is the most faithful memory keeper of all? Not because it never changes, but because it changes only slowly, recording as it transforms? Philosophically, we may wonder if stone remembers more than facts. Perhaps cliffs and mountains contain not just evidence of events, but moods. The hush of a desert made permanent in wind-rippled sandstone, the persistence of a forest carried into coal seams, the sudden interruption of catastrophe sealed into dark bands of shale. They are not just records of what happened, but of what it felt like when it did. In this way, cliffs are not diaries written for us, but diaries kept regardless of whether anyone reads them. Could it be that the earth cannot help but remember itself, even if its readers vanish? Not because memory is needed, but because remembering is simply the nature of matter. Waves etch limestone. Dust settles into siltstone. Ash cools into basalt. In their stacking, the slow book of the planet grows thicker, never discarded, never quite finished. And though earthquakes fold its pages, though subduction swallows whole volumes into fire, fragments always resurface. In truth, the earth is never without its own archive. And we, standing before cliffs and ranges, become accidental readers of this archive. In every valley carved by rivers, in every plateau sliced by erosion, the planet opens a glimpse into its own script. Even if we did not exist to notice, it would go on writing. Perhaps that is why stone humbles us. Not because it is silent, but because it is endlessly expressive in a language we are only beginning to learn. And yet, if stone carries within it memory pressed and layered, if it remembers what we forget without effort, then what of the seas that are erased and return again? Could even an ocean, once gone, still dream of finding its shape once more? And yet, if stone holds memory, if cliffs preserve what we forget, then perhaps oceans too, once erased, find a way of remembering themselves. For nothing in the earth is final, not even the silence of a vanished sea. Given time, even the most immense union of land is impermanent. A supercontinent may look like a monument, a complete shape, a culmination of drift, but within its solidity lie fractures already rehearsing separation. The earth is patient. It waits. And in that waiting, oceans dream of returning. Rifts begin almost invisibly. The crust stretches, ever so slightly, pulled by mantle currents moving beneath. The lithosphere thins, weakening at seams hidden below valleys or ancient mountain roots. Small faults appear, cracks etched first by tension too small to notice. Then, as centuries accumulate into millions of years, those cracks widen. Rivers may flow into them, carrying sediments, creating basins where water gathers. Eventually, fissures split open to the mantle, birthing new ridges. Here, magma arrives, solidifying into fresh ocean floor. From such threads, oceans are reborn, not as sudden floods, but as long exhalations of the earth stretching itself apart. The Atlantic itself began this way, once a rift barely noticeable, running through what was then Pangaea. Lava filled its opening, then cooled into basalts, while water slowly crept to claim the space. What began as a crack became a sea, what began as a sea became an ocean, and what began as an ocean evolved into a division so great it reshaped biology, climate, even our maps. Could it be that every new ocean carries within it the memory of a vanished one, echoing its expansion in a cycle of disappearance and return? Maybe, maybe not. But the symmetry is difficult to ignore. Geologists have traced these patterns through isotope clues, through the signatures of basalt ridges, through the magnetic stripes etched on the ocean floor as poles reversed and reversed again. Like diary entries written in alternating ink, they show that Earth rehearses its partings and reunions without rest. Oceans return always, though never precisely the same. The Pacific will one day close. Another will open in its place. The memory is not exact repetition, but rhythm, an improvisation on the same theme, repeated endlessly across deep time. Philosophically, it humbles us. We measure permanence in generations, in centuries if we are hopeful. But the planet measures permanence in ephemerality. To Earth, permanence is illusion. Supercontinents that feel immovable drift apart. Oceans that feel infinite are consumed. Yet even consumption is only pause, only a hidden chapter that waits for its turn to be rewritten. Perhaps this is why seas feel eternal to those of us who encounter them. They embody return. They remind us that even when erased, they are still dreaming of recurrence beneath the stone. And there is tenderness in this cycle. The ocean taken away is not lost forever. Its memory lies dormant, hidden in the forces of mantle and crust. Its creatures may vanish, but water returns, reshaping coastlines and teaching forests, deserts, and clouds to dance differently again. It is the reminder that endings themselves contain beginnings, that each closure harbors the seed of an opening. Not because the earth is merciful, but because it does not know how to stop moving. To sit with this thought is to realize how temporary even a world of one continent truly is. Beneath its silence, below its deserts and mountain ranges, rifts are already whispering their intent. The reunion of land is only half of the story. The other half is the parting to come, the rebirth of seas, the return of tides into new basins. And yet, if the earth dreams of separating what it has drawn together, if new oceans are always waiting to be born, then what of the dust carried by deserts across these new horizons? What whispers drift through the air, traveling farther than water itself, binding continents back to seas in its own quiet circulation? And yet, if oceans dream of return, if rifts quietly whisper of separations yet to come, then between those slow tectonic breaths something else begins to drift. Something quieter, more immediate, carried invisibly across the skin of the planet. Dust. Fine, endless, uncountable. It lifts from the heart of superdeserts and enters the sky, where winds give it passage far beyond the boundaries of land. Each grain, no larger than a thought, is a fragment of memory, a particle broken from stone, carried downwind to places it never knew while whole. In a supercontinent, the desert core would stretch so wide, its silence so complete, that dust would dominate the air. Winds tug across its expanses, peeling grains from dunes, from salt flats, from dried lakebeds once touched by water long vanished. The atmosphere here is not clean, but hazed with veils of particles. Not opaque, but softened, muted, as though light itself carries the signature of the desert. And these grains, though carried by chaos, are far from empty. They are heavy with minerals, iron, phosphorus, calcium, pieces of the ancient crust broken down into nourishment. They fly outward, across mountains and forests, across seas, and fall like unseen gifts into waters starved of nutrients. Could it be that even deserts, which seem so lifeless, are in fact givers of life, sustaining oceans an entire world away? Modern science tells us this is already true. The Sahara exhales plumes of dust that cross the Atlantic, feeding the Amazon soils with minerals it would otherwise lack. Dust from Asia rides high into the jet stream, returning to Earth in distant seas, fertilizing plankton blooms that anchor food webs. Each grain is both relic and messenger, carrying the memory of one place to another, its chemistry altering the balance of far-off ecosystems. In a supercontinent, where deserts would be immense beyond imagination, that breath would be magnified. Entire oceans might depend upon the unseen rain of dust carried downwind, the flying archive of land delivered into water. And still, there is more hidden in each particle. Within its layered chemistry, we can detect not just minerals, but stories. Pollen grains trapped in its edges, microscopic shells powdered into dust, isotopic traces of weather in the soil from which it was born. To hold a single grain beneath a microscope is to hold the memory of climate, the dryness that made it, the erosion that freed it, the winds that carried it into the sky. It may appear small, almost meaningless, but multiply it by billions and billions, and entire seas are altered, entire records of Earth cycles are spread across the surface again and again. Dust reminds us that even the smallest fragment can participate in planetary change. Philosophically, the idea unsettles and soothes at once. We think of deserts as empty, as absence. But perhaps they are more like vast lungs, exhaling what the planet no longer keeps, sending it outward to nurture elsewhere. Not because deserts live, but because dust is capable of carrying memory farther than stone ever could. Maybe absence itself is creative. Maybe silence is simply another form of distribution, where what seems to be taken away in one place arrives as gift in another. Look closely at a distant horizon and you may see it. Light softened, skies golden with haze, sunsets deepened by fine particles suspended in the air. These are not just symbols of beauty, but markers of connection. A mote that left the interior of a continent now changes the color of an evening sky across the ocean. In that drifting grain is the entire philosophy of the earth. Everything that disperses becomes part of something else. Nothing, not even dust, is truly alone. And yet, if dust can cross boundaries so easily, carrying the memory of deserts into oceans, if particles can rewrite entire ecosystems across distances greater than we can imagine, then what of ice? What of glaciers that grind and move not through air but along the ground itself, pressing land into silence and holding memory beneath their frozen weight? And yet, if deserts can exhale their memory into the air as drifting dust, then ice holds memory in another way, tightly, silently, as though wrapped in its own still breath. For should glaciers bloom again upon the supercontinent, they would spread outward from the poles or from high newborn mountains, pressing across valleys, burying plains, sculpting the land with their immeasurable weight. To walk within their reach would be to walk inside time itself, where every movement, though slow and muted, erases layers of the present and uncovers fragments of the past. Ice landscapes are not loud. They alter the world softly, yet persistently, whispering of climates forever circling back. A glacier seems frozen, still, immovable, but in truth it flows, grain by grain, crystal by crystal, pulled forward by gravity, sculpting everything beneath it. Stones grind against each other until they are polished smooth. Valleys deepen, cliffs sharpen, grooves are cut into bedrock like the strokes of a chisel. Beneath the calm white pedestal of snow and ice, the planet is being redrawn. And when the ice retreats, as it always does in time, it leaves behind landscapes permanently changed. U-shaped valleys, scattered boulders, scarred plains. These are the whispers of glaciers, reminders of their passing, the soft hand of patience applied to the body of stone. Science tells us ice is also an archive. Each layer of snowfall, compressed under the weight of centuries, traps the air of its time, tiny bubbles of atmosphere sealed into its frozen skin. Within them, oxygen isotopes record past temperatures, ratios shifting ever so slightly with each season, each cycle. Carbon dioxide, methane, and dust particles remain, preserving knowledge of climates and winds long forgotten by living eyes. To drill into ice is to lower a needle into the grooves of a vinyl record, letting the planet's own music play softly across thousands of years. Could it be that ice is not the opposite of time, but its closest companion, holding stillness as a way to stretch memory further than any living witness can? Philosophically, this unnerves us, for ice embodies both concealment and revelation. It buries landscapes, smothers habitats, and yet protects within its depths the most fragile details of air, ash, and dust. It speaks both of destruction and of preservation, not because it chooses either, but because its nature is to weigh down and to carry forward. Maybe this is why glaciers feel so solemn, because they embody both silence and witness, both forgetting and remembering. On a supercontinent, their role would be even greater. Without oceans to regulate heat, climates could tilt wildly, giving glaciers room to advance across vast landmasses. Valleys that once held forests could vanish beneath kilometers of solid ice. Deserts themselves might freeze at their edges, wind and snow combining to create mosaics of white and brown. All the while, ice would continue its subtle recording, trapping gases, layering snowfall, keeping track of atmospheres with impartial patience. The ice would know climates not as we feel them year to year, but as rising and falling tides of centuries. In the end, glaciers do not last forever. They melt, they recede, their waters running to seas yet unborn. But they leave their whispers behind, etched in stone, in sediments, in isotopes contained within the shells of drifting plankton nourished by their runoff. Their memory continues even after the ice itself is gone, spoken through the fingerprints of geology and chemistry. And as we watch them come and go, their slow expansion and withdrawal remind us not that the Earth changes once, but that it changes again and again, always returning to patterns we thought erased. And yet, if silence beneath glaciers still carries whispers, if even the weight of frozen time can preserve the faint breath of vanished climates, then what of the Earth itself, forever caught between remembering and forgetting? What does it mean for a planet to keep archives not in words or pictures, but in stone and dust and ice, forgetting in one place only to remember in another? And yet, if glaciers whisper their archives beneath silence, preserving even the faintest breath of vanished climates, then we discover that the Earth does something stranger still. It not only remembers, it forgets. It erases its own records and then rewrites them, layering memory with absence, absence with return. Perhaps forgetting and remembering are not opposites here, but part of the same quiet rhythm, oscillating endlessly in the slow pulse of geology. For in the deep trenches of the ocean, memory is consumed. Plates slide beneath one another in subduction, carrying with them entire libraries of landscapes. Ridges drowned, fossils dragged, coastlines broken down into fire. In the mantle, heat dissolves their details. Ocean floors that once held shells, sediments, even fragments of human debris are melted wholly, folded back into Earth's circulation. It is forgetting made absolute. And yet, from that seeming loss comes remembering. The same material resurfaces elsewhere, reborn as volcanic arcs, as uplifting mountains, as ridges that push seafloors outward again. What vanishes under the weight of fire resurfaces in the shapes of cliffs or in the ash that falls upon new soil. Earth is always both eraser and archivist. It is easy to believe that forgetting means destruction. But in Earth's cycles, forgetting is simply displacement. Memories shifted, dissolved, then spoken again through different forms. A continent consumed transforms into granite reborn in mountain roots. Carbon carried into subducted limestone becomes carbon exhaled through volcanic clouds. Ancient seas evaporated into salt pans return in chemical traces found in rain. Could it be that memory in the Earth is never linear, but circular, looping like tape forever recording over itself yet still keeping echoes beneath? Maybe, maybe not. But the evidence suggests fragments are always preserved, even within forgetting itself. Stone testifies to this duality. Entire epochs are missing from local records, breaks in the layering where time has been erased by erosion or tectonic devouring. Geologists call them unconformities, gaps in the planet's diary. And yet, even these gaps speak. A tilted bed of sandstone may lie directly against an ancient limestone, separated by millions of years gone missing. In that silence we sense forgetting, but it is an eloquent forgetting. A reminder that memory is not seamless, that absence is part of the record itself. Perhaps memory without gaps would be dull, without meaning. Gaps remind us of what cannot be known, the mysteries left intact. Philosophically, this teaches humility. We imagine permanence in layers of stone, but the Earth is not a perfect archivist. It deletes as often as it preserves. It is not like us, clutching at each detail. Instead, it balances memory with forgetfulness, maintaining just enough record for continuity, but enough erasure for renewal. If everything endured intact, nothing could change. If nothing survived, nothing could be learned. And so Earth oscillates between revealing and hiding, between keeping and losing. Not because it is careless, but because that is the only way life and stone can continue together. Perhaps we too are included in this process. Our cities, our artifacts, our voices will fade in time. Subduction will erase most of what we have written, folding it back into molten dark. But somewhere, in a fragment of plastic layered into stone, or a spike of carbon in an ice core, or a single seam of ash pressed into soil, a trace will remain. Not the whole of our story, but enough for memory to echo faintly. which is all the Earth has ever preserved, fragments, patterns, whispers. And yet, if forgetting is not loss but transformation, if remembering is not permanence but fragments echoing through stone, then what else lies beneath? What other voices of the past, erased but also preserved in altered forms, might someday be carried upward again, breaking silence to remind us that the planet, even in forgetting, never truly lets go. And yet, if the Earth itself forgets and remembers in equal measure, if oceans vanish only to return and mountains rise only to erode, then what of us, so brief, so fragile, and yet so intent on permanence? A supercontinent is not just a question of stone and sea, but of the beings who walk upon it. What would become of humanity or whatever descends from us, when the world folds itself again into one immense body of land? Would we scatter into its margins, following the forests and the coastlines as we always have, or would we find some way to inhabit its hollow center, to press survival into the desert silence where no ocean winds arrive? The Earth tests its life in countless ways, and we would be no exception. Crops that thrive on dependable rains might collapse when monsoons rearrange themselves along strange new paths. Societies that depend on rivers would be forced to abandon them when their courses bend into dead basins instead of seas. The margins, where water touches land, would grow crowded, and in that crowding, we might find old patterns repeating themselves. Migrations, displacements, conflicts softened or sharpened by scarcity. Would memory of our current coasts, the maps we know, the harbors we build, the familiar tide lines we measure our lives against, live on as stories only, folded into myth by communities exiled to new peripheries? Perhaps in such a world, memory itself becomes a form of survival. Not technology alone, not resources alone, but the choice to carry forward the image of an older Earth. Could it be that the cultures who thrive are the ones who weave their geography into poetry, who remember not just the rivers that now fail them but the concept of rivers, not just the coasts that have vanished but the idea of shorelines themselves? It has happened before. Legends of floods told across thousands of years, oral histories of islands remembered even after they sank, myths that preserve truths our science would later confirm. Memory, in this sense, becomes a map carried forward, invisible yet indispensable. But maybe memory would also be dangerous. A longing for seas where none exist might anchor us to loss. A yearning for old rivers, old climates, could keep us from seeing the new possibilities. For life has always insisted on adaptation. The microbes at the edges of existence, the lichens in deserts, the fish that drifted into new seas during tectonic shifts, all thrived not because they clung too tightly to what was, but because they allowed themselves to adjust to what was becoming. Might we be tested in the same way, invited, perhaps forced, to release beloved coastlines, and to find home in forms more strange, more unfamiliar than anything our maps have shown us before? Scientifically, the pressures of such a world are difficult to imagine. Larger deserts dominate the interior. Coasts become crowded with species once separated. Diseases move with migrations. Climates tilt in cycles that resist our control. The isotopes of our bones would tell the story, carbon tracing the shifting patterns of food that travel to us with difficulty, oxygen in our teeth recording the altered sources of drinking water, strontium betraying the movement of our ancestors between regions compressed by scarcity. In the record of fossils yet to be made, humans, or our successors, will show the fingerprints of this superworld, our very chemistry rewritten by its constraints. And yet, there is tenderness in this possibility, too. For though we may vanish at last, as all creatures do, something of us would remain. The myths of oceans, the memory of tides, the architecture of coastlines drawn in forgotten ruins, all may echo forward. Perhaps one day, on a distant shoreline of the next ocean-born, descendants of descendants will walk and find pieces of our world in silence. A tool eroded to stone, a fragment of language still carried in ritual, a shadow of who we were. Could it be that what becomes of us is not our survival, but our translation into memory, the same way forests have become coal, or shells have become limestone? And yet, if the question of our place on this supercontinent lingers, unresolved, then perhaps another question waits quietly behind it. If we fade into myth and our memory into stone, what becomes of the maps themselves, the ones we once drew so carefully to assure ourselves of permanence? And yet, if we ourselves may fade into myth, if our memory lingers more as fragments than as forms, then what of the maps we draw, those fragile diagrams of certainty we carry against the vastness of change? Maps are prayers whispered into paper, gestures of order made against a shifting world. We believe them fixed because they appear complete. They fold the chaos of land and sea into a shape we can hold. But coastlines change. Rivers wander. Continents move. And in time, every map dies into silence, an artifact of geographies that no longer exist. To look at an ancient chart, curling along its edges, ink faded to the shade of shadows, is to see more than lines. It is to touch the faith of those who drew it. Faith that the horizon could be approached, that land could be named, that water could be bordered. Yet each of these maps is already a ghost, lingering after the coasts it once promised. A harbor captured in careful strokes may now lie hundreds of meters inland. The sea retreated. A peninsula may exist only as an island fragment, its connection to the mainland eroded. A river mouth carefully etched might now be dry sand or a drowned delta. Could it be that the silence of an erased map speaks louder than one newly drawn, that in its inaccuracies we hear the voice of time undoing the illusion of permanence? Digital maps seem less fragile, less subject to the weathering of wind and water, but even in code they are only a pause. Servers erode, languages shift, information disperses into forms unreadable to future eyes. What survives might not be the accuracy, but the faint reminder that we once believed in borders, in grids, in the comfort of outlines. Perhaps the cartography that endures longest will be geological, not human. Layers of sediment remain long after ink and code dissolve, recording not ambitions but elemental truths. Where floods passed, where deserts spread, where glaciers pressed their weight. And yet, even silence carries. A map eroded by water, its ink washed away until only faint scars cling to paper, remains eloquent. Its unreadability becomes part of its story. It speaks not of where we are, but of where we no longer can be. In its absence, it becomes a fossil of thought, the residue of our need to organize what cannot be tamed. Perhaps this is why we continue to draw maps even as we know all must eventually fail. Not because they endure, but because their impermanence mirrors our own, and in that echo we find comfort. Philosophically, an erased map humbles us as fossils do. A trilobite pressed into shale is not alive, but it tells us life was once there. A map, distorted by time or swallowed by erosion, tells us likewise that once there was a belief in knowing, in naming. That belief, like all things, drifts into entropy. Maybe, maybe not. But what endures is not accuracy, but hint, silence pointing to its own outline. And so, if even our maps will one day die into quiet, if our outlines of the world dissolve into smudges, then we must ask, what happens when the continents separate once more, when outlines are shifted again, when the very skin of the world tears apart and reforms? Would new maps be drawn, or would the earth itself become the only cartographer, sketching in stone, in ridge, in rift? And yet, if our maps fade into silence, erased with the coasts they once traced, then perhaps that silence reminds us of something deeper. A supercontinent, however vast, is not a final state. It is only a pause, a breath drawn inward before the next exhalation. Nothing in the earth holds still forever. One mass becomes many, many become one. The cycle loops across deep time, a rhythm so patient that even stone struggles to keep its memory intact. We are taught to think of endings as permanent, but in geology, endings are always rehearsals for beginnings. Continental drift is sometimes described as motion, but it is more than that. It is breath, inhalation, and exhalation played out not in seconds but in millions of years. Oceans open like lungs filling with air, only to collapse again into silence as they are expelled beneath converging plates. At the joining of continents, mountains rise, but the weight of their union presses against the mantle until cracks form again, allowing separation to creep into place. What looks like unity is always already fragile, fissures beneath the surface preparing the next unraveling. Could it be that even wholeness itself is temporary, destined to fragment as surely as waves become spray? Science shows us this in fragments too clear to ignore. The Atlantic we know today was once only a rift, a crack that widened until water claimed it. The Himalayas tell the story of collision, of India's drift that pressed into Asia. The magnetic stripes etched into basalt across ocean floors record reversals and rhythms, writing in black and white the slow ballet of divergence. Each supercontinent, Rodinia, Pangaea, Gondwana, lives in stone's memory not as permanence but as phase, part of an endless choreography. Entropy pulls gently in both directions. To gather and to scatter, to unify and to disperse. To imagine a supercontinent drifting apart again is to imagine patience embodied. At first the fractures are almost imperceptible, nothing more than rift valleys where rivers trickle through stretched crust. Kilometers moved over millions of years. Faults deepening as mantle plumes press upward. Then, just as quietly, water follows those cracks, filling them, widening them, replenishing seas the planet once erased. Oceans born from fractures are not intrusions, they are inevitabilities, the return of distance where compression once held sway. Perhaps this is why every map of Earth is temporary. Not because our drawings decay, but because the surface itself refuses to be fixed. Philosophically, the thought is unsettling. We are drawn to wholeness, to unity, to permanence. But here, Earth shows us that perfection in unity is not meant to last. Wholeness is only a phase, beautiful in its magnitude, untenable in its weight. Fragmentation is not failure, it is continuity. Memory itself is built on this same principle. We unify stories in our minds, then we forget, then we piece them back together again. Maybe the Earth, too, remembers only in fragments, never in complete wholeness, and that incompleteness is precisely what allows its cycles to endure. To stand within this thought is to surrender scale. Our lives measure in decades, nations in centuries, civilizations in millennia. But the fracture of continents is measured only in eons. To Earth, a supercontinent is short-lived. To us, it is unthinkably vast. This mismatch between our time and its time humbles us, reminding us how little permanence belongs to flesh, how little presence even our species carries against tectonic rhythm. And yet there is wonder as well, because even in this inevitability of separation there is beauty. The new oceans that will form, carrying dust and nutrients, birthing life in unfamiliar shapes. The new climates that will arise, rewriting skies into unfamiliar symphonies. Earth does not end simply by breaking, continues by breaking. Perhaps our mistake is in looking for finalities when the truer story is one of endless rehearsal, the planet practicing its own reassembly and unraveling with the patience of eternity. And yet, if the supercontinent too must fracture, if every unity exists only to become multiplicity once more, then perhaps what endures is not land or sea at all but memory itself. Echoing through stone, dust, ice, and thought, asking softly whether even we, in our brief time, may yet become part of this eternal drift. And yet, if the supercontinent must one day fracture, dissolving into many once again, then we are left with the possibility that nothing final exists in the Earth story. Land gathers, land scatters, oceans erase themselves only to return, mountains rise only to erode into sand. The planet is not building toward permanence. It is rehearsing endlessly, shifting arrangements like an orchestra that never stops playing, even as its instruments break and renew. Perhaps what truly endures is not the shapes themselves, but the memory they leave behind. Fragments in stone, whispers in dust, pulses in isotopes patiently waiting in the dark. Memory drifts as surely as continents do. We may imagine, just for a moment, time flowing differently. Continents not splitting, but folding back inward, carrying with them all the layers of recollection, all the fossils and fragments pressed together into some impossible whole. In such a vision, everything lost is gathered. The raised ridges of vanished seas, the forests transformed into coal, the echoes of creatures that no longer breathe. Each layer of memory pressed against the next, vast and complex. as though the Earth dreamed of a supercontinent, not of land at all, but of remembrance. Could it be that the truest union lies not in the crust beneath our feet, but in the quiet collecting of everything that has ever been? Science shows us the drift outward and inward as neutral motions, lithospheres sliding across the mantle, convection currents pulling and pressing. But behind these motions we may sense philosophy. The outward drift as forgetting, the inward merging as recollection, cycles of erasure and return that mirror our own fragile attempts to hold what time dissolves. When we remember something long forgotten, is that not a kind of continental convergence, bringing fragments back together across the vast sea of forgetting? And when memory scatters, is it not another rifting, another ocean drawn between pieces that once felt whole? Perhaps we too are geologies. Each life is a landscape, shifting, fractured, sometimes rejoined. We build our own supercontinents of memory. Childhood folded against adulthood, loss pressed next to longing, questions forming strange ridges in the mind. Over time, these two will break apart, drift into silence, settle into fragments incomprehensible to those who come after. But while they endure, we walk across them the way we walk across land, believing them whole even as they are always in motion. The planet hums its story at scales we can scarcely imagine. Oxygen isotopes in ice cores hum with the memory of climates circling back. Carbon in stone hums with the breath of ancient forests. Strontium hums with the drift of mountains and dust. These are not just numbers, they are the elements of imagination themselves. They tell us that memory can be encoded in matter, that silence itself can store rhythm. Maybe memory is not a property of life alone, nor of humanity alone, but of the earth entire. Maybe the planet itself is the mind, drifting outward, drifting inward, folding what is lost into what becomes. There is humility in this thought, for we wish so often to be lasting, to be recorded clearly, to be remembered. And yet the earth suggests that memory is not clarity but drift, not permanence but rearrangement, not immortality, but echoes pressed into layers that will themselves move, bend, and fracture. To be remembered, even as fragment or isotope or dust particle, may already be enough because nothing is truly erased, it is only redrawn. And so, as continents continue their patient journeys, as oceans open and close, as glaciers whisper and volcanoes exhale, we may realize that the truest supercontinent is not a land mass at all. It is an arrangement of memories, folded over one another in endless combinations, unified not by geography, but by thought. For isn't this what we are doing now? Drifting through time in imagination, gathering fragments into a single, quiet reflection. Perhaps the Earth's deepest lesson is not about land or sea but about the eternal drift of memory itself, folding outward, folding inward, never still, never complete. And yet, if memory itself drifts forever, if nothing is lost but only rearranged, then what of us, adrift within it? Are we the ones remembering the planet, or is it the planet endlessly remembering us?